did want to get to an important news development in the world of activism for a story that we've already been following closely, namely that dispute between Dell and the holders of DVMT. That's the stock that tracks its holding in VMware. And remember, I did a story on this a week and a half ago talking about significant opposition to Dell's plan to take that company public by exchanging stock in Dell and cash for that stake or for those tracking shares. Now, those shares were issued at the time that Dell, of course, completed its purchase of EMC, and they have never done what Dell's bankers at the time said they should, namely track fairly closely the performance of VMware. They have always traded at a far larger discount, at least, than was originally forecast. This morning, Carl Icahn comes public with a letter indicating that he owns as much as 8.3% of the shares of Dell, and you can add him to the list of those shareholders who are vehement in their opposition to the transaction as currently constructed by Dell to buy in that tracker. He points out, of course, the huge discount that is there between where the tracker is and where VMware shares are, and the fact that in his belief it's simply an opportunity for Dell and Silver Lake, the owners of Dell, to pick up $11 billion at the expense of shareholders. He says that being the discount between where the tracker is and where the actual underlying stock is, and he says we should get that $11 billion. That's the simplest way to explain it at this point. It's a strong letter from Mr. Icahn involving strong language. A couple of key points here that are worth discussing, though, because and if you want some reference point, you can go back to my previous story about the opposition. But an IPO of Dell is certainly one possibility here to head off this or change from the currently constructed deal. And Dell has that right to go public and then buy in the tracker at a 20% premium to its trading value over a period of time. But Mr. Icahn makes a point in his letter and says that's an empty threat. He does not believe that there will be an IPO from Dell. He says even in the almost impossible event Dell overcomes the massive execution challenges of an IPO cramdown. Remember, they'd be issuing it, then knowing that you'd have to issue a lot more stock to take in the tracker. He says applicable law, and this is very interesting, will suffocate Dell's ability to achieve the draconian outcome they so desire. As time goes on, we expect Dell, and so his point is Delaware law and the fairness standards in Delaware law, actually we can hold off on that, guys, let me explain this first, are why he believes he can tie them up in litigation for years to come. For its part, Dell's simply saying, and I will tell you that some of the banks that have already given them indications that I shared, remember Jim with you a couple of weeks ago in terms of what an IPO would be worth, are serious. Jamie Dimon was in one of the meetings, Moynihan from B of A. These are pretty senior people who don't believe they would be taking on a large litigation risk if they were to take Dell public, as is its right to do so and then buy in that tracker. But it's a key point of contention. Another one is doing nothing, and that's what you just saw there. Let's bring that back up. Because Icahn also says, hey, you know what, your idea that you're just going to do nothing, you'll pull out of this transaction, but you won't do another, nah. Time goes on, we expect Dell's very cyclical business to be basically stagnant or decline, while VMware's business should continue, they say, to grow and become much more profitable. What does that mean? Well, you're not going to be able to buy that 50% economic ownership in VMware because it's going to cost you so much. So you got to move now before VMware starts even accelerating in terms of its appreciation as a result of its growth versus Dell's. And finally, very important and interesting development from Mr. Icahn. He says, listen, DVMT shareholders, you want more, we all do, but you don't want enough. And if you want to sell at a higher price, sell to me. I actually will put together potentially a competing bid for part of the stake in DVMT. I'm happy to own it, and then I'll deal with Dell, because he believes, that is Mr. Icahn, that essentially he could buy $10 billion worth of stock to get $11 billion, that being that discount, and capture it. Very interesting move here from Mr. Icahn. Not perhaps unexpected, but he has now taken the lead in this opposition that, Jim, I talked about at length a couple of weeks ago with you.
Well, why did Michael Dell retweet something in my column this weekend where he retweets Sanjay Pooner, who's the excellent COO of VMware, who was on Mad Money? He said, our VMware customers can get back to focusing on their business, and we make the infrastructure just run. And then Michael says, truly our goal with Dell Tech Solutions from edge to core to cloud. Doesn't that, with Michael retweeting in my column that he's saying that, doesn't that imply that, hey, listen, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to let VMware win? Why would he retweet that if he didn't feel that way?
I don't know.
I mean, to me, that retweet really changed my view of what's going to happen.
By the way, it's not as though Dell has had anything to do with where investors value DVMT. It is traded on its own. That is where it is traded. It's not necessarily their fault.